All right. Well, it is our appointed time. I imagine we will have folks who straggle in on Sunday morning, or I suppose Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, depending where you are. But certainly a free weekend event. We don't expect to have everybody here right when we kick off, but so glad to have all of you here and to have such a international representation. I think it's particularly meaningful for the topic that we're all discussing and for the guest speaker that we have this morning. So really fantastic to have that. Are we already recording, Ron?
Yes.
I'm recording. Sweet. Oh, it's the whole day starts out with the Puerto Rican birthday song. I love it. All right. Well, welcome everybody to day 2 of the Space Education and Consciousness Symposium. I'm Mark Wagner, welcoming you on behalf of the Human Space Program and all of our partners, including the Virtual Reality Overview Effect and Aries Learning. I'm going to just say a few words of introduction, and it turns out most of the things I have to say this morning also serve as an introduction of our keynote speaker, Frank White. So I will dive right in, and then we'll transition over to Frank's slides and Frank's welcome question and all that, and it should be a good interactive session. So I introduced yesterday with this slide, Frank, the overview effect. We thought it might be good to give any folks who were new to it some background knowledge before we dove into the event. So for those of you who maybe did hear about this for the first time yesterday, we're just really thrilled to have Frank White here with us. He is the author of the Overview Effect, which originally came out in 1987. And for anybody that's entirely new to us, I know Frank will go into more detail, but described the change in perspective that astronauts have when they're looking down on the planet and seeing no borders, and seeing us all in this together as a crew on Spaceship Earth hurtling through space. The book is in its 4th edition, if I can put this up to the camera. It's really an easy and accessible read, but Frank now includes all of the interviews with the astronauts. So it's also quite a tome of primary documents from a historical perspective. So I highly recommend it. Frank went on to write 2 more books in the trilogy, if you will, the Cosma Hypothesis, or the, oh shoot, the word is leaving my head, but it's the consequences of the overview effect, and looking a lot more at the future of humanity as kind of shepherds of life through the solar system. And thus, the Human Space Program was born as an ambitious 1,000-year project, central project of the human species, to be good shepherds of expanding life throughout the solar system and beyond. Again, I know Frank, I did that yesterday. I know Frank will say a lot more about that in his presentation, so I will leave that to him. The 3rd book in the series is the New Camelot, and hopefully Frank will talk about the overview roundtable that many of us met through as well. The other partners include the Virtual Reality Overview Effect, and I'll give Anahita a chance to say a few words about that. Today is a little bit more focused on consciousness, where yesterday was a little bit more focused on education. And Aries Learning, which is a vision for K-12 schools, high schools in particular, focused on space education, space exploration, and all the things that we're talking about here. I would also be remiss not to mention my actual day job, and there's a great opportunity for all of you to get additional professional development or additional experiences like these. We are hosting a speaker series through Space Prize. Space Prize is focused on empowering young women to pursue STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts, and to explore careers in the growing space industry. But we're hosting a series of guest speakers on Wednesday afternoons. It's 4 p.m. Pacific. That's now open to all students and teachers around the globe, and enthusiasts as well. We have astronauts, we have engineers, we have scientists, we have teachers. Some of the speakers in this series are also here. So great way to extend your learning, particularly if you're interested in how these things influence education in the next generation. That said, our organizers are Dr. Anahita Nizami, who's a space psychologist, if I may, and also founder of the Virtual Reality Overview Effect. Ron Rossano, who you guys have seen, is the host here. Ron's a future astronaut with Virgin Galactic and does a lot of work with Galactic Unites, education outreach. Omar Sanad is not with us today, but he has, for most of this process, really represented the human space program and been an integral part of planning and launching the event. And there's myself, and I've mentioned Aries and Space Prize. So I'm excited to be here, but given today's focus on consciousness, I want to give Anahita an opportunity to just say a couple of words before I go on and finish my introduction of Frank.
Just a warm welcome to everyone, and Frank, the keynote speaker, and Janet, welcome back. Thank you for all of your support yesterday. It was a great day yesterday. Everyone, was sort of arriving from all across the globe, and it seems like the same is happening today. And we left feeling very excited and inspired by the conversations we had. And I'm sure the same will happen today. And so we're going to begin with Frank's talk. Just a little bit about BROE. We are a multi-sensory technology provider, and we design programs based on the overview effect, the transcendent experience of the overview effect. So I think I'll say no more because I have a talk just after Frank, and we'll talk a bit more about it then. I'm going to hand over to Frank.
Well, let me just finish my introduction. I want to revisit no worries, the norms. So from the organizers to the participants, just want to reiterate the participation norms. Definitely participate in the text chat, which is fantastic. We got everybody jumping in there, or a number of people jumping in there already this morning. It's meant to be interactive. I know Frank's got a welcome question for you right off the bat, and there'll be opportunities for you guys to ask questions later. We've got about 44 people live right now, so it might be good to use the raise hand feature if you've got something to say in the middle of the session. Ron and Anahita and I will be watching for that. We can call it to Frank's attention if we need to. And then feel free to unmute or share when you're invited to do so. If you really need to interrupt, go for it, but obviously we're trying to keep from having disruptions during the session. And then just use the help feature if you need it. That will send a message directly to Ron as the host. And hopefully we can help you troubleshoot whatever issue you have. That said, we definitely want this to be a discussion, and I know Frank is planning to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the hour, and so we hope to hear from everybody. If you were not with us yesterday or you need a refresher, the spaceeducation.events/schedule is where you will find the schedule. I will drop it into the chat here in a moment too, if nobody beats me to it. But there you will see the timing for the day. You can see Frank's keynote session. And for session 5 and session 6, which are the remaining sessions of the symposium, you will see there's 4 things happening at a time. So there's 4 breakout rooms. Consciousness 1 and Consciousness 2 have most of the psychology sessions, and Education 1 and Education 2 have most of the education-focused sessions. So for instance, they're at session 5 right after this keynote. You can choose to see Anahita talk about BROE. You can go see Carl talk about, I had a pop-up here in front of it, the biological overview effect. Mike will be talking about astronomy, and I'll be talking about Aries learning and preparing students for humanity's multi-planet future. So those are just breakout rooms here in Zoom. Down at the bottom of the screen, click on the breakout room button and choose the one that matches the name of the room that you'd like to be in. Education 1 and 2 and Consciousness 1 and 2. We will, at the end of the day, have a closing session back here in the big room, another panel discussion like we had yesterday. And it was great. It was a similarly sized group to this, so we were able to invite everybody into the discussion after hearing a little bit from the panelists. So hope you guys will come back for that at 11:45 Pacific. So we'll be done, it's essentially a half-day event. We'll be done in the early afternoon here. And you guys, of course, can translate to your own time zones. Now, before we move on to Frank, again, it's a small enough group. If there's any questions about the schedule or the ways it's all going to work, you can drop them into the chat now, and one of the co-hosts will hopefully be able to help you. Yes, there were consciousness tracks yesterday too. Good point, and education tracks. For what it's worth, the keynote and closing yesterday were a little more education focused, and the keynote and closing today are a little bit more consciousness. All right, well, that brings us to Frank White, space philosopher, the president of the Human Space Program, the the head of the overview roundtable, if there is a head to the table, Frank. Right?
It's a round table. There's no head.
Frank is clearly our leader and our guiding light. I mentioned a number of the books that Frank has authored. I thought it might be fun to share that he actually has a distinction of also co-authoring a couple of books with Isaac Asimov, so I couldn't help going and getting those. And those were good reads too, and some of them were fun for me to share with the kids. History one there. Frank is a graduate and a professor of Harvard, and we're just so thrilled to have him here to share his insights with us this morning. Thank you, Frank. I should also mention I met Frank because he's also a professor at the Kepler Space Institute, and was thrilled to take one of his classes there and get introduced to this community. So Frank, thanks for joining us. Feel free to share your screen and take over here.
Thank you, Mark. Let me get the screen here.
And meanwhile, let's have some applause in the reactions and in the chat. Welcome to Frank.
Thank you. All right. Well, it's great to be here. I should say first, happy Earth Day weekend. Happy birthday to Mark and anybody else celebrating a birthday. And I also want to say, my goodness, congratulations to Mark, Anahita, Ron, Omar, everybody involved in this. This event grew to some extent out of the overview roundtable, putting together what we called proto task forces. These were experiments in one of the aspects of the human space program, and that is to have 16 task forces tackling the big issues that face us as we face large-scale space migration. And we had 5 task forces, one on education and the other on psychology. And as is happening these days, nobody in charge, nobody directing it really. The organizers just decided to put this event together. And I'm just delighted that the human space program is in any way a part of it. And I think you'll see why as we move along here. Let me see if I can go to full screen. So welcome, everyone. I don't want you to try to answer this question now, but just think about it as we go through. I think it's very relevant. We have someone from Ukraine here because I believe our work in bringing the overview effect down to Earth has never, ever been more important or urgent. And so the question of the day is, if not us, who? If not now, when? Many people have been given attribution for this quote, including John Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Hillel, and I've kind of modified it for our purposes. Now's the time to take a new consciousness into the world. It's not a nice thing to do, it's a necessary thing to do. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And, you know, maybe you thought things are going to get back to normal in 2022 after 2021 and 2020. Well, maybe not. So if we don't tackle these issues now, when are we going to do it? I want to just set the stage for talking about the overview effect by telling the origin story of the overview effect, because not everybody knows about it. You might be surprised to know, originally the overview effect had nothing to do with astronauts. Did you know that, Mark? Mark probably knew.
I remember you sitting in the plane, but no, until I saw this slide, I didn't realize it went back to the O'Neill community. That's
okay. All right. I'm sorry, Mark, I put you on the spot there. Yeah, so in the beginning, I was very, very involved with Gerard K. O'Neill, who created the Space Studies Institute and who envisioned humanity expanding into the solar system by building freestanding space communities out of extraterrestrial material at what's called the Lagrange points, essentially between the Earth and the Moon. And what started all of this is I was thinking about what would it be like if I lived in an O'Neill community. And I was flying cross country, looking down at the Earth, thinking about this. And I had an epiphany, that's all I can call it. I felt like, oh, those people would always see the Earth in the sky, like we always see the moon in the sky. They would just know things we are struggling to grasp. Their consciousness would be inherently different from ours because they would see our planet as a whole system in which everything is interconnected and interrelated. And the term overview effect came into my mind, and I landed and I called NASA because there were no space people at the time. And I thought, I'll interview astronauts. That's the closest I can get. And I said, I have to interview all the astronauts. And the guy laughed at me and he said, they're kind of busy, Frank. Can you come to Houston? I might be able to provide 2 astronauts for you. And I said, okay, that's a pretty small sample size. And he said, well, why don't you interview retired astronauts? I'd never thought of that. So I said, okay. And that's what started it. Now, that changed the hypothesis from these speculative future people to real people astronauts. And the new hypothesis is really that the overview effect causes a shift in consciousness, not among future people, but current human beings living today. And it's defined as a shift in worldview reported by astronauts and cosmonauts during spaceflight. Astronauts and cosmonauts see the Earth from space and in space. They see it from space in low Earth orbit, where it fills their view. And in space, they see the Earth against the backdrop of the cosmos. It transforms their perspective on the planet, on themselves, on humanity. And it's really a shift in identity from parts to the whole. It's very well known that when astronauts first get into orbit, they look for Houston, or they look for London, or they look for their hometown. And after multiple orbits, they start looking for different parts of the Earth that they've come to know, like this shows Africa, this particular image, the blue marble. And then they start to identify with the Earth. And that's a shift in awareness that we really need from parts to whole. What about consciousness? Wow, you can get tied up in what consciousness is. And I want to just note that there are a lot of experts on consciousness here. Anahita, Claudia Wells, they can expand on what consciousness is. I'm just going to mention a couple of definitions. One is the simplest definition, that consciousness is the fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. In other words, it's our worldview. And right now, everybody here by that definition is conscious. Tonight, when you go to sleep, you won't be conscious. That's pretty simple. But then there's a lot of complicated discussions of consciousness. I'm very drawn to panpsychism, a philosophy that says consciousness is a fundamental feature of physical matter. Every single particle in existence has an unimaginably simple form of consciousness. This is the essence of my book, Cosmohypothesis, which is that the universe is a living information system with levels of consciousness throughout. And we don't restrict consciousness to humanity. In fact, it is available throughout the universe. The question is, how conscious is the universe, and what role do we have to play in increasing that level? So the overview effect is really all about consciousness. You know, an individual's worldview or self-awareness is formed by their consciousness. And as I said, it's a matter of identity. But one of the lessons learned in writing the overview effect is you cannot have an identity about yourself without having identity of the other. The other may be the earth. It may be the solar system. It may be the cosmos. It may be God. But what the overview effect really does, it transforms your sense of self by transforming your experience of the other. You know, there is a famous saying, show, don't tell. And I think the best way to understand the astronaut experience is to listen to them. And that's how I wrote my book. But in July of 2019, I had a different experience with NASA of interviewing astronauts. I was actually invited down to interview them. And I interviewed a total of 10, 3 of whom were on the space station at the time. And the other interviews were recorded and eventually turned into an amazing series from NASA called Down to Earth, 19 short videos and a half-hour documentary called The Astronaut's Perspective. This is a 3-minute version of one of the interviews with Tracy Caldwell Dyson. I am actually there. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear somebody going, uh-huh, oh yeah, and that's me. But NASA didn't think that I was very important, and they're right. People don't really want to hear the questions. They really want to hear Tracy talk about the experience. So let's give it a try.
My first look at the Earth from that vantage point was on ascent in my wrist mirror, looking at the aft window behind me, knowing that I was the first one that had to get out of their seat and film our external tank falling away. That was my first job, aside from all the monitoring that I had to do. And so my view of it was very fleeting and very technical. It was background to the task that I had at hand, and that was pointing a camera at an external tank so that it could be analyzed. Then when we got into orbit, we had a very fast-paced mission, which all space shuttle missions were. You had 10 to 12 days of fast-paced work. And it was my commander, Scott Kelly, who carved out 90 minutes, an entire orbit on flight day 10. And he said to the rookies, the 3 of us, I want you guys all in that window, and I don't want you to move. And he already pre-coordinated it, got the lights turned off on the station so we could see everything in its grandeur. And that was the first moment that I had to really soak it in, and discovered a lot of things about my reaction to that view in that relatively short period of time. And then, of course, there was my space station flight where I lived up there for 6 months, and every night that I could, I was planted in that cupola, much like the picture shows, and gazing at it. And there wasn't a single regret I had about the time I spent there. In fact, it almost, I dare say, grieved me to think about how in the world am I going to describe this? There's no words. There's no picture I could take to do it justice. There's no watercolors that I could put on paper to come close to the vividness, the ever-changing picture that I see staring at this planet. Everything from the colors to what changes the atmosphere goes through, depending on where the sun angle is and whether the moon's in the view or not, to just how fast we're going over the surface of it and the way shadows are changing. You could see the same landmass over a period of 2 weeks and it looks completely different because of that. To then looking at the stars and the blackness, a black that nothing here on Earth ever can replicate. And then you look at the space station around you and you're like, this is amazing. And all the people who are a part of this structure that are, I know, either at their desks, creating the next great marvel, or they're sitting in mission control, controlling everything I see. And that's where it kind of hits you that you are but a small fraction of the human race that will ever get to see this the way it is right now.
So I don't know how a person can watch that and listen to it and not understand that the overview effect transforms people's mindset, their consciousness, their identity. Just talk to an astronaut and you'll find out that there's no question about it in my mind. But when you write a book, as I did, you start to learn things you didn't know when you started writing it. I realized quickly the overview effect's just the beginning of the transformation of consciousness that spaceflight is going to bring. That is to say, what we have so far is looking at the Earth from low Earth orbit, looking at the Earth from the moon. And these are realizations that the Earth is a whole system. We're a part of it. It's all integrated and interconnected. But then this is the view of the Earth and the moon from Mars. It's really not the same. And I called that the Copernican perspective. That's a realization of the Earth as part of a larger whole, the solar system. And then I defined a special definition, kind of the overview effect writ large, called the universal insight. And I'll talk about that more. But that's more of a connection to the cosmos, the largest whole of all. And that's the Edgar Mitchell experience. Why did Edgar Mitchell found the Institute of Noetic Sciences to study consciousness after he had an overview effect experience? Well, again, Claudia Wells is here. She can tell you more than I can. But when I interviewed him, he had this dyadic view of the world. And everything is on a dyadic spectrum. And he said, there's the individual / universal dyad. On the spectrum of consciousness, points of view can be anywhere along that. Most of us are clustered down toward the individual point of view. The moon experience catapulted us toward the other end. In other words, again, a change in awareness and consciousness. And he had that experience himself, which is described in my book and also in a number of other places, including some of the work done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences. But that's why he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, was because what he learned about consciousness returning from the moon. So the overview effect is an experience, but it's also a theory. And one hypothesis we've already talked about is that the experience changes your consciousness or your worldview. And we have data for that in the astronaut interviews. There's a second hypothesis that future space dwellers will automatically have a different level of awareness or consciousness. The data is to be done. And I'm hoping to live long enough to interview some of those folks. But maybe most exciting is it's become a movement. This is a global movement to bring the overview effect down to Earth through things like what Anahita is doing with VROE. And there's a third hypothesis here, which is that sharing this experience widely through commercial space flights, virtual reality, and in other ways, will change not only individual consciousness, but think about it, this planet is at a level of consciousness that can be transformed. One of the reasons I believe this is going to happen is there's something unique about the overview effect as a theory. And a friend of mine pointed out that it could be considered a boundary object. This is an idea developed in the 80s by some sociologists. And a boundary object is information or a theory that can be adapted to the local needs of people using it, but it does have a coherent core, common identity. So it's coherent at the center, flexible at the periphery. And it can be sort of a touchstone for people who have widely different backgrounds and experiences to work together for a common cause. And that common cause would be transforming the worldview of the world. And then there's this final hypothesis, the Cosma hypothesis. And this is the ultimate connection of space and consciousness. I call the universe Cosma just to give it a personal name. And you know, Cosma is alive. It is self-aware. It is intelligent because we are alive, self-aware, and intelligent. We are conscious. Therefore, the universe is conscious. In my book on the topic, I asked myself, why has evolution created us? After 4.5 billion years on this planet, we have appeared, and we can leave this planet and go elsewhere. Is our purpose to make Cosma more alive, self-aware, and intelligent? I'm just going to play a brief part of this interview with Reed Wiseman, another astronaut. And I want to point out one thing he says that he perceived, and then I will move on. But let's just listen to a little bit of his commentary.
I had looked at pictures on social media and pictures in NASA archives of the Earth so many times, I actually started to get worried. What if I get up there and it's just like the pictures? I mean, that's going to be weird if that's the thing where I'm like, oh, that's just like the pictures. I'm ready to go home now. And then on the Soyuz, my launch vehicle, I launched with the Russians. And on my Soyuz, when I first got a chance to look out my little window, which is about right here at the Earth, there's something about looking out a round window at the curvature of the Earth that makes it just more pronounced and really makes it have a huge impact. I just had this feeling like I was way up high looking down, and we were over the ocean, and the blues that I saw, it was ridiculous. I'd never imagined in my entire life getting to see something that beautiful. It was so foreign for the human mind to look at that, to see the total black of space, to see the Earth highlighted that way. And then I got to see a sunset. I had one piece of paper, it had a picture of my kids on it and a few of my flight data file burn times on it, but I just took a pencil and I drew like 15 curved lines, and I just wrote light blue, darker blue, pink, purple, dark purple, all the way down to the surface of the Earth at sunset, because the scale of looking at a sun refracting through the atmosphere, it blew me away, and no picture captures that. There's no high enough dynamic range of a photo to capture what the human can see. So that first look outside completely sidelined me. I had a GoPro, and I made a recording to my brother of, no matter how much it costs in the future, come do this. You have to come do this. I mean, it's amazing. Over my 6 months in space, getting to look at the Earth every single day, it shows you something different. Every day it shows you that it's alive, it's a being just like we are. We're guests on this planet, and it's our mother, it's our father, it's our starship cruising around the sun in the middle of the solar system. There was never a moment that I looked out the window.
I just want to stop it there because I want to focus on what he said. It's alive, it's a being just like we are. Talk about a transformation in consciousness. If we could start understanding the Earth as alive, a being just like we are, wouldn't it change how we treat the Earth? Wouldn't it change how we see ourselves as part of it? Part of the Cosma hypothesis is, I believe we're starting to see the Earth that way. And it would be transformational if we could begin to see the universe, the solar system, in that way. And again, it's a hypothesis, which means it needs to be validated, but I believe it's worth doing. And I think it's an exciting idea. And that's one reason we have the human space program. When I was writing the book, I realized that exploring the universe is too big a job for one country, one space program. It's even too big for SpaceX. I'm sorry, Elon Musk. But I felt like we needed a global program, a central project for all of humanity. So we did establish the human space program as a central project to develop a citizen authorized blueprint for conscious space migration and stewardship of the solar ecosystem. That's really only the beginning of the project. As Mark said, we envision it to be a millennium long in time. And so it's really pretty ambitious. Whenever I tell anybody about it, they say, that's pretty ambitious. And I say, yeah, it is, but it needs to be done. So we're going to give it a shot. So just to summarize and conclude, space exploration does a lot. And we're always being asked by people, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to explore outer space? There's so many problems on Earth. Well, it transforms our consciousness. And I believe it transforms our consciousness in such a way that, it really will help us solve these problems on Earth. We don't have a really good track record so far. So let's give it a try. Let's bring the overview effect down to Earth. And then large-scale space migration, which is the next step beyond exploration, is going to bring a new level of self-awareness to humanity. We're going to get to see if those future space dwellers can really help us even more profoundly understand our planet, because they're going to see it in the sky all the time. And perhaps most interesting, as we expand into the universe, perhaps we will discuss or discover our fundamental purpose as evolved beings who are at the moment a single species on a single planet. But we're at this profound moment in human history where we are going to become a multi-planet species. This is our chance to do it right. And I just want to invite everybody who's here today to find your place. This is the greatest adventure of all time. So don't pass it up. If not us, who? If not now, when? Thank you so much, everybody. It's been great being here today.
Thank you, Frank, for a wonderful talk. So we're going to open the floor up to questions, and I'm sure all of you have got questions. I've got quite a few questions around the overview effect, consciousness, or anything that you've been wanting to ask Frank. If you put it in the chat and with your name, then I can bring you to the floor.
We do have a hand up too, Anna.
I do. Oh, good. Right. Okay. Whose hand is it? Too many people to see the hands. So whoever's, if you've got a hand up, unmute yourself and please do ask the question. I can't see whose hand is up.
It's Shmuel.
Hi, welcome. Please ask your question.
Okay, you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, I want to ask you how overview effect idea can support development social consciousness and the consciousness of social justice.
So how can the overview effect develop the social consciousness of?
Yeah, of course. This is mean of my question.
Unmute.
that is really if I understood the question, that is really the whole point of bringing the overview effect down to earth. What we have been talking about is transforming individuals. It's been a psychological analysis so far. So, I mean, you listen to the two astronauts, and I think you could see the shift in their explanation of their experience. And one of the wonderful things about astronauts is they say, and I believe that, I believe it was said in one of the clips, you don't go to space for yourself, you go to space for everyone. So the next stage really is sociological or social, which is, can we share this consciousness, this awareness broadly enough to transform society? We are in the situation we're in Europe today, which is totally unacceptable because of the level of awareness or consciousness or the worldview of certain people who have a certain attitude toward borders and boundaries, and do not see the whole and do not understand the whole. So that is what we need to transform. It has to happen on both an individual and a sociological level.
So Graham has a question as well. So Graham, please ask your question.
Many thanks. Frank, that was wonderful. It's always great to hear you speak. 2 nights ago, I was on a rooftop using some telescopes in Jacksonville, Florida, with some undergraduate students of chemistry and astrophysics. And they asked me a bunch of questions. We got into this long conversation about the future. And they were really worried about what things scare me about the next 20 and 30 years. We got into talking about artificial intelligence and the potential for Neuralink to go the wrong way. And we also started talking about things and these ideas of human consciousness and brain uploading to computers. But we spoke a lot about more pessimistic views. And as much as I tried to steer it back to an optimistic viewpoint, I think the students were just really in the mood to think more of what the bad things could be. And so I'm wondering, from your viewpoint, what things are you optimistic about right now with the future of space exploration and consciousness and what comes next in the coming decades ahead of us?
Good question, Graham. Well, first of all, I want to say it would be naive to ignore the negative possibilities. I am also a student of artificial intelligence as well as space exploration, and there's tremendous opportunity for negative uses of it. But in terms of space exploration and development, it's very reasonable to be concerned that, for example, we will take our current awareness into the solar ecosystem and we will behave in the same way we behave here on planet Earth. Just to give one small example, I have waged and am waging a battle to stop using the term colonization. It's a never-ending battle. People say, oh, we need to colonize Mars. Well, no, we don't. That's an old concept from the 19th and 18th centuries that is not the way we want to go. And that's again, I think one of the things we need to do is look at what are the worldviews of people who are, in fact, have the wherewithal to do this. Now, interestingly enough, we also have to have the courage to look at what's really going on with some of those who are powerful enough to take this in the right direction or the wrong direction. So, for example, a lot of people look at Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, and they're just negative about the whole adventure because he's a billionaire. What they don't know is that Jeff Bezos is, in fact, strongly influenced by Gerard K. O'Neill, who had a very positive view of large-scale space migration and of the benefits to the Earth in terms of environmentalism. Now, you may feel that Jeff Bezos is not sincere about it, or you may question if he's really going to do it, but I would urge the students to really dig in and look at what is actually driving people in this direction. And the other thing I would say, just to close, it's meetings like this that make me optimistic. I see people taking action, not ignoring the negative possibilities, but working hard to steer the entire enterprise in the right direction. And, you know, if we do not do that, if we don't take action, our worst fears will come true. So I don't know if that's the best possible answer, but I think my point is nothing is cast in stone yet. We have a chance to make a difference right now.
Thank you so much, Frank. We have another question from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Yadil. Yadil, is that from earlier, or have you got another question?
Yeah, for now, Mr. White, I like science fiction. Without disrespect, my favorite novel is Dune. I have read all of them. That is my point of view going forward. Why we don't push forward to do a figure in the whole world under the United Nations on the role as a planetologist? Somebody that uses all the satellites throughout the whole world and is conscious about the ecosystem and all the interaction about the species, and give advice to the whole nations of what do we have to crops, what we have to put, which ecosystem we have to push forward as a main advice to the whole government without a tie to a single nation, but as a point of view from that person or that community using the satellites, they are in charge on the recommendation of what to do on the world to keep nature healthy. And for example, on conflict like we are having right now in Ukraine or Pakistan or so on, or Africa, which tend to have a lot of war after the conflict has ended, to take rapid action or to say, Mira, we're having this thing right now on that region of the globe. We need this type of plants, this type of tree, this type of bird. So in another region, we have like a ecosystem close, and we are doing so far right now the small tree. And then when the conflict is over, when we rebuild the establishment, we also plant and to foment the ecosystem right away. And then on the same part, use it to teach children at an early age how to take care of the planet. So I highly propose to make a planetologist for the world. I don't know if you can follow me on this.
And Nahita, could you add to that? I'm not sure I understood the question.
I think, let me see if I've got some of that. So I think we're talking about ecosystems and we're talking about health and how we can use natural ecosystems here on Earth and replicate it elsewhere. I think we're talking about consciousness. So if you can ask a specific question at the end of that, that would be wonderful.
Let me rephrase to explain a little bit more. For example, we have Ghosty. Ghosty are two satellites that cover 2/3 of the Earth, and they're just static, and they check everything for lightning to storm, and then we use it for FEMA or for everything that is an emergency or so on. Then we got all this whole data from Landsat 9, the series and everything. What I'm proposing is to make a job or a status as a person that take all this information from all the satellites around the world that have to know all the ecosystem of the whole world, and to make like a chart of what is healthy and tackle all the areas that have been in danger. I don't know if you can understand me.
I think I did understand at that time. One of the ideas that intrigues me is that of planetary management. And that is to say, taking all the data that we're getting from satellites, and this would be a positive use of artificial intelligence, taking all of this information and beginning to build a model of the terrestrial ecosystem, where things are going right, where things are going wrong, and how we can intervene to make things go in the right direction. This is one of the great benefits of space systems that is overlooked, which is that we do have these satellites in orbit, and they're telling us so much about our planet. And, you know, all the issues people have about the environment can really be tackled with this information, but we have to figure out how to make use of it and how to share it with people making decisions. So I'm really supportive of what you're saying, and I hope that we'll see the benefit of doing exactly what you're talking about.
And Liam Kennedy from ISS from above, in response to your question, it's in the comments, but I'll read it out. NASA has a focus to do just this, and many Earth viewing satellites are now being integrated to provide just that kind of a result. Ron Rossano, geostationary operational environmental satellites observing Earth 24/7. And Graham, finally, there are certainly already ecologists and other researchers using satellite-based data for their research, and much like Keynes and the Imperial from June are making recommendations, but there's so much nuance to getting governments and people to listen and work together. It's not my area, but very interesting. Are there? I don't think there are any more questions.
Hey, Kabina reached out to me and asked if we could, and Paul, I see your hand too. Sorry, Kabina was asking me if we could pass this question along. If our consciousness is present in every single practice, in every single particle in our universe, then why is it brought together in such a concentrated and focused way in each human brain? And does our stewardship responsibility arise from this?
Yes, I believe that is the case. This is exactly the question I was asking in the book. You know, let me just step back a little bit and talk about the Cosmo hypothesis. When I was finishing writing the overview effect, I saw a TV program shortly after the Challenger disaster, where they were asking, what is the purpose of human spaceflight? And Tom Wolfe, who wrote The Right Stuff, said, we've never had a philosophy of space exploration. And I decided, even though I was not a trained philosopher, that I would try to create a philosophy of space exploration. And the first realization I had that day was, all of our reasons for going into outer space are human-centered. What about the universe? What about the Earth? Why have humans been supported to have this consciousness that Kabina is asking about? In other words, why has evolution created the human brain, which is such an amazing instrument for doing so many amazing things, including the building of spacecraft? And the hypothesis really is that our purpose, our ecological purpose, not our religious purpose or anything like that, our ecological purpose is to seek out how we can help Cosmo become more alive, more intelligent, and more conscious. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's the right question to ask as we face this inflection point where we're really just about to embark on this amazing journey into the cosmos.
And I think I just wanted to add, Frank, that you know, you mentioned panpsychism, and David Chalmers, of course, writes a lot about that. So if anyone interested in following up, I would recommend his work. But I think that there are different types and forms of consciousness, and you know, we are a product of nature. We come from nature, and so it's interesting to see how that our consciousness would replicate in nature. And so it's such an interesting area, and it's such a wide area for discussion that I think we could all spend hours talking about it. But I think it's important to note that there are different forms and types of consciousness, rather than just the panpsychic level.
All right. I think Paula's got her hand up. Paula and Elizabeth have their hands up.
Paula want to say something also.
Yes. So In the 1980s, I was working at NASA, and I was asked to write a proposal for the first missions of satellites viewing the Earth. And each one of these satellites had an individual operative purpose. We looked at the seas, we looked at trees, we looked at forests, and we looked at all kinds of land around the Earth. And it's the first time we did this, and we learned a lot about the Earth. And I mention this because just for perspective, we're talking about where we are now, when it's 40 years later. You know, it takes time to mentally get this. It takes time to both observe and to understand, and also to integrate the information that we learn, and also the imagery that we see, to have it provide a reasonable way to go forward. You know, so we have these ideas about going into the universe and so forth, but we have to grow our consciousness and awareness to be able to take it in and know what to do with it. With our knowledge and with our experience of all these entities. And this is just looking at around the Earth, you know, before we go out to explore the planets. And that was in the 1980s.
Paula, was that the Earth System Science project?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my job was, they had a very big proposal for this, but my job, as a lot of what I did when I was at NASA, was writing summaries that would go to the White House and to the Congress for funding, because a lot of the scientists relevant to the White House and the Congress would look at the full thing, but the summaries were for the president and the major players, just to get a sense of what this was about.
I could say a lot about what you did, and congratulations on being part of that, Paula, because that was an important project. But I think the main point you're making is, you know, we've gone from a paucity of information to an overwhelming amount. And now the job is, what do we do with it? And, you know, in other words, how can we turn it into wisdom in terms of working with this living system we call the Earth?
I think it has to be done incrementally, and we have to do it consistently, not just a splurge. We have to really work on this in the schools and in society to get to know Earth. You know, we have Earth Day yesterday. Was it yesterday? I have no idea. And it's just too much. People don't relate. They go, oh, Earth Day again. You know, they don't relate. And I think that's what our strongest effort must be, is humanity, to be able to deal with the fact that the Earth is not it. We're just one tiny little dot. And so people don't have any sense of this, and they can't grasp it. And that's what we need to work on.
Agreed. Thank you, Paula.
We're drawing towards the end of Frank's talk. Frank, do you want to say sort of some final remarks?
I think Elizabeth has a quick question, and then I'll do exactly that.
Yes.
Thank you. What are we talk about, we're not ready. Some people talk about we're not ready to go to space. We don't treat each other, not just the planet, we don't treat each other well enough yet to take it beyond the borders of our atmosphere. So what are the ethics of the HSP program, and how do you manage those ethics and make sure they're practiced by the members here on Earth as a platform, not just for their personal growth, but to model a future, to model the behavior for future HSP members, so they can see the possibilities of a new culture in space before launch?
Wow, that's a great question. I can only say I can't really lay out all of the ethical considerations that we've gone into, but we have laid out, and I believe it's on our website, you know, our cultural norms, what we believe in, what we care about, how we want to behave. And I do believe that the people who've been drawn to the human space program so far have self-selected. And I think perhaps the most important thing, Elizabeth, is realizing that the whole system is greater than the sum of the parts. That together, as the astronauts say, we're all in this together. And each one of us, rather than vying for attention and saying, oh, look at what I've done, I think the whole point is, what have we done together? What can we do together? And I really would, I mean, this is so typical, but I have to say it, I really would urge people to go to the Human Space Program website, because we really tried to lay out a foundation to answer that question. And we want to invite everybody to get involved in it. So thanks, Elizabeth. I wish I had more time to answer that one. I guess what I would say, going back to Graham's question, it's most important for young people in particular, but for all of you here today, to understand you can have an impact. What is it that you care about? What is it you can add to this entire adventure? I'll just go back to myself. I had no credentials. I had no PhD. I wasn't an astronaut. I had no justification for writing the overview effect. None. I had an experience that compelled me to give my life to this work. That's all you need. You know, what is it that you're driven to do? What is it you feel you can add? In the book, I call it being a terranaut, being an astronaut of planet Earth. And each one of you, I believe, has something to contribute. So I would hope, as we end this talk and as you finish up today, you will have that question. What is it that I have to add to this great adventure? Because you do have something. I know that. Thanks, everybody.
Great note to end on. Thank you, Frank. Let's hear it for Frank again in the chat. The reactions, yeah, and actual applause.
I just wanted to add one interesting point that Paul Gilbert has made, just to follow on Frank's words. And he said, it's very fascinating, this link between space awareness and consciousness. These experiences are all clearly powerful personal transformations. And there's interesting consciousness raising experience in psychedelics also. But we must be cautious of being overwhelmed by beauty and awe, this kind of hedonistic search for it. The key issue we need to grapple with is that the Earth itself is not that friendly to biological, our type of life. And the universe certainly isn't. Just a few miles above this tiny planet and you die. And I'm sure there's quite a few space experts here that can talk about that. There have been at least 4, probably 5 mass extinctions. Indeed, 99% of all species that have existed are now extinct. The basic building blocks of life is DNA that create all living things and basically builds them to pursue for survival and reproduction. Hence, no living thing chose to be here or to be what it is, and yet we find ourselves in a world where life has to eat out of life, and the predator-prey relationship is pretty unpleasant. I agree. Viruses, bacteria, and parasites, not to mention. That's just such a great quote, text that I felt, we had to read it out loud. But thank you, Paul. So we can close with that, Mark. So should we move on to the rest of the slides?
Yeah, so just to get everybody where they need to be, this is the time where you will select your breakout room. I'll put a slide up here real quick, and I will drop in the chat the link to everyone. Here's the symposium schedule. You will want to make sure you're scrolling down to the right day.